Hello guys, it's YLLiBzify here. In today's video I have a Photoshop tutorial. This tutorial is going to be sort of explaining and showing you how layer styles in Photoshop work. So once again, like I said, this is my first tutorial and I do plan on trying to make these once a week, and it'll probably be every Tuesday or possibly every Wednesday depending on how busy I am. And it's all really dependent on how many people send me ideas as well. At the moment I have a little list and I've probably got something like 5 or 6 suggestions for tutorials on there, and I'm going to go through that list and make them. So if you have a tutorial idea and you don't want me to carry on making tutorials, please just put down a comment down below on this video or even any of my other videos and say how do I do this, how do I do that, can you show me how to do this? Or head over to one of my social medias down in the description below, such as Twitter, and just drop me a message or at me and say, can you make a tutorial on this please? And I'll probably respond and say yes or no, or well, I'm working on that already, or I'll add it to my list and I'll get that sorted for you. So let's get into the tutorial. As you can see in the background here, I've made a couple of examples here of what type of thing you can do when it comes to layer styles. So these ones are obviously without layer styles, and the ones underneath are with layer styles. So this one is ones that I'd like to say that I did only do these really quickly before the tutorial, and I didn't spend a lot of time on them. So it's quite good to see what sort of effects you can get even with minimal work when it comes to layer styles. And another thing to note is you can actually add layer styles to any layer you can think of. So as you can see here with my background layer, if I add something like a stroke and I change this to inside and then I increase the size, you can see that's now added a stroke to the inside of this layer. So it's not only text, but text is one main thing that a lot of people and myself use layer styles for. So once again, this can have really nice effects. So when you're doing a layout or working on a project, generally you'll want everything looking the same theme and to fit in nicely. So if you've got something that's really bright and stuff like that, and then you've just got this plain old white text, it's just not going to fit in, and you may not even be able to read it properly. So it is all down to obviously what sort of design you're working on really. But first of all you really need to do to start making a layer style is just go over to your text layer, so whatever text layer you have, or whatever layer you have really, just the example here is text, and then you just double click and it will bring up layer styles, or you can go to layer. There is a way here of doing it, I can't actually remember, layer styles, and then you've got here all your different layer styles, which will then bring up here and it will come up to your layer styles. So the first tab by default will be your general blending options, which are just the same as these blending options and things here with your fill and so on. So as you'll see on here, if I change this now and I change it to opacity 22%, down here will change to 22%, and if I click OK, that will now be 22%, and vice versa if I put that back to 100 and come on here, it will be 100. So the main things you'll generally want to look at are just all of these down here in the tabs, and with any of these to activate them, all you have to do is just click in the little box here and it'll add a tick, and that's now activated a drop shadow, and as you can see around the edge I now have a drop shadow. So I'm just going to go through all of these quickly, or as quick as possible, with trying to explain sort of what they are and not skipping on any points, to show you what they actually do and sort of how you can use them. So with Bevel Emboss, all you have to do is just once again click on it, and then if you click on the actual Bevel Emboss, it'll bring up the options and all the values that you can change for the bevel. And as you can see here, if I just change this, oh sorry, for some reason that's on stroke, so if I change that to inner emboss, that'll be your general default. I may have accidentally changed my default, and as you can see that's made a bevel in and around the text, and this gives it sort of a bubbly sort of 3D feel to it, and it's sort of beveled up and chiseled out sort of thing. It's quite hard to describe, and this will generally look quite good on certain text, like even on this one down here I added that to this layer style around, and you can see around the edges it's got a slight bevel, and all I've done is lowered the opacity so it gives it more of not particularly a 3D feel like this, but it gives it a little bit of a highlight around the edges that sort of draws your eye a little bit more to the text, and that way it sort of stands out more from the normal background. So on Bevel Emboss, the general options you have, the main ones you want to focus on are the ones up here, and then these sort of sizes really, and possibly the colour and the opacity of them. So on here the main ones are obviously the options here, and if you flip through these you'll see that they are all slightly different. So by default it will be inner bevel, but you can go to outer bevel as well, and that's now done the bevel, but on the outside of the text instead of the inside, which it does look a little different, and it all depends on what style you're going for. This for me makes it look like you've chiseled out or around all of this and made the text, whereas on this one it makes it look like you've chiseled the opposite way round, and it's quite weird and hard to describe, but it gives it sort of, like I said, a 3D feel. And then emboss is sort of, in my opinion, a mix between the two of inner and outer bevel. And then you've got the other two down here, which are pillow and stroke, which I've never actually used and I don't really know anything about, so I can't really help. But that to me gives quite a cool effect, and really I can't see a lot of things that I'd be working on that effect would work for, but it all depends on what you're working on. So the main one that I would usually use is an inner bevel. So to get this effect here, all I'd done was increase the depth all the way to the top, and then went to size and just tabbed this up until I thought, well, that looks quite nice. And around 10, you know, you've got the nice effect around here, and it looks quite nice. And then I just, the one thing actually I didn't do is I didn't add a soften. So if you go to soften here, you'll see that that's now softened. I've only done 2, I've pull it up by 2, but you can now see that's softened some of the brighter colours and not so much the darker ones. You can't really see too much, but the lighter colours here, where they were really sharp and really bright before, they're now a little bit more dull, and in my opinion it gives it a little bit more of a natural look. And so if I set that to 0 again, you'll see that's a lot brighter, and especially around these bits here it's really bright. And if I put this to, even if I do it a bit higher, 3 or 4 or 5, you can see that's now smoothened everything out, so it makes it look really rounded and smooth. Generally though, I would only use that to sort of 1 or 2 or something like that, like I said, just so it smoothens out the general feel and gives it a little bit more of a natural look. So like I said, all of these things you'll have to sort of play around with to get the sort of effect you're looking for. And the other thing you have here is a direction up and down. So if I switch this, you'll see that's now changed the direction of what the bevel was. So generally I'll keep it on up, but like I said, it all depends on what effect you're going for. It will just flip what the bevel was doing and what way it was done. And then you do have shading options and all of that sort of stuff here. So if you flip through all your shading options, you can see that the shading on this is now rotating and going round, and then you've got the latitude, which you can see that's now changing it again. And once again, it all depends on what sort of effect you're going for. But when it comes to the angle, sometimes it's good to have an angle the same, so you may have a light coming from this side, so it may be good to make this so it's sort of up here where the light's coming through, so it looks like, especially if you're doing a highlight effect like I did here, so it looks like the light that you've got in your scene is actually making the text light up a little bit around the edges. And then another thing you'll have here is to contour, and to be honest with you, I don't know how to explain what a contour is, but if you flip through all the effects, you can see it changes what the actual beveling is doing. And on some of these you can get a really nice effect that you're looking for just by switching through these, and you can make your own custom ones, although I can't actually remember how to because I haven't in a very long time, but you can make your own custom ones. So maybe if I go to custom shapes, oh no, okay, we'll ignore that because I can't remember how to do it, but you can usually make your own custom ones and import other ones into these. So the normal default ones may not be what you're looking for, but you can generally then go in and change them. And then you do have an anti-alias, I can't say the word very well, but if you tick that, you won't really see much of an effect, but if you have it really big or really small, you'll definitely see an effect when it comes to the lines around the edges, and it'll basically make them a little bit less jagged. And when it comes to the highlight and shadow mode, you can actually change these blending modes here. I generally keep them on the default mode, but occasionally I will actually change the colours. So I may want this to be a little bit less bright, so I may want actually, when it is on there, I may want it a little bit more grey so it doesn't stand out quite so much. And on some of these as well, if I have it like this, I may change these to 25 and 25 or something like that, so it just gives it a little bit of a, instead of being really bright and really visible, it gives it a little bit more of a, you know, a faint effect to it, which can be quite nice, and it all depends on what you're going for. I'm going to put these back up to 75% though, just for the tutorial purposes. And if you go to contour, once again, I don't actually know how to describe contour, but as you can see, as I click that on, it's now changed how the bevel looks. And you can go into here and you can change these and it will change slightly how the bevel looks. On some of them it will be a really slight change, but on some other ones like this one, it's changed that and made it look really, I don't even know how to describe that. It just looks horrible, really. And once again, you've got the anti-aliasing here, and you can turn that on and off. And this is actually a good example here. I didn't realise that would be quite a good example. You can see that these are quite jagged and blotchy and weird, but if you go to the anti-aliasing, that's now straightened them all out and made them less blotchy and a lot more straighter and less jagged, which has made it look really shiny, whereas before it didn't look quite so shiny and smooth. And as you can see again, if I switch it on, it now does look, especially around here and here. And on this as well, you can change the range. Generally I'd keep this around the same or a little bit lower, but I wouldn't really often do it all the way higher. I'd always do it a little bit lower compared to the default, which is 50%, but it is all depending on, once again, on what sort of effect you're going for and you're trying to do. And stroke, once again, if you click here, it will enable a stroke, and with the stroke it will just, by default, will add a stroke around the outside of your layer. So if I added that to this, there wouldn't be an outside because it would go off the canvas and you wouldn't actually be able to see anything. But on here, on this text layer, if I make this bigger, you can see the stroke a little bit clearer, and I can change the colour of this to whatever I want, and I can even go in and add a gradient instead, or a pattern. I generally only use colour and gradient though, so if you go to gradient here, it's now set that as a gradient, so the stroke itself has a gradient to it, which it can add a really nice feel, although it is a little bit harder to sort of work with sometimes. But it's all down to when you sort of get used to how all of these work, you can get all of the layer styles working how you want them to and getting some really nice cool effects happening. So if you go into this, you can then edit obviously your gradient, so you may want it to be, you know, only a little bit of a lower grey, and then to a white. And then on here you can obviously change the layer style options, the gradient options like you normally would. So at the moment it's on linear, and you may want to change that to 90% so it starts off dark and goes up to light. And you can also increase or decrease the scale. Generally I'd only ever really increase it unless I was going for a really weird look, because as you can see that doesn't look very nice. Like I said, so that's just an example. I'm just going to change this back to colour, and I'm going to change it to sort of a dark red, just so you know, just an example. And the other options you have here are obviously the opacity, so you can lower the opacity of this. So you may want the main text itself to be visible, but you might want the stroke to only be a little bit visible, so 15% and a little bit opaque. That would be a good option if you have, you know, other text or other objects behind your text, so then your text stands out a little bit more, and then your stroke isn't fully covering whatever is in the background. And the main other thing you'll look at is the position. When you go to position, you have outside, inside and center. So outside is what we have it on at the moment. I'll just put the opacity back up, and like I said, that makes a stroke outside of your layer, and in this example outside your text. But if you change that to inside, as it says, it will now change that to inside. I'm just going to lower the scale, and that's now done a stroke inside of the layer and not outside. And if I change that to center, it will then make a stroke in the center of your layer, so that would be in and outside, just centered to your layer. Generally I would use outside, and to be honest, quite a nice effect is having it on white, especially if you've got a lot of stuff going on in the background, and then changing this to something like overlay or screen overlay or soft light, and then changing this to 1 or 2, and it sort of, I don't know, in my opinion it sort of lets the text pop a little bit more to having just nothing or a normal stroke. So I think I've described that one pretty well. And if you go to inner shadow now, it's quite self-explanatory. It makes a shadow but inside of the text, and once again you've got all the values here. All of these will do roughly the same thing as what they've done on all of the other stuff above that I explained with the Bevel Emboss. You've got anti-aliasing again, which will make things a little bit smoother and cleaner. But an interesting thing on this is you can actually add noise. So as you can see here now, I've upped the noise. You can see it's created a noise, and sort of it doesn't look quite nice, but on some things you may actually want the noise to be a little bit up like that, because this now give this, you know, a little bit of a blurry, noisy effect, which for metal-y sort of effect that I was going for on this, it might actually work, because not all metal is, you know, really smooth and glossy like chrome, and will have a little bit of blotches and noise in it. But once again, I'd usually just leave these especially as default, and I'd only really play with these options here. And this probably isn't the best example with this text here, so I'm gonna click OK, but I'm gonna go down to the text that I had below here. Which, am I on the right text? No, it's that one. And I'm going to add a inner shadow on this one, just because this one will be a slightly better example where it's a little bit thicker and you'll be able to see the inner shadow better. So I've added the inner shadow there, and you can see that's now created a shadow there, and it makes it look like there's a hole inside of the background with light sort of shining through to create a shadow. And once again, you can change all of this stuff here, so you can change the blending mode. So you may want it, you know, overlay, soft light or whatever, and then when you change the colour, okay, it's not really working very well where I've actually got a colour. I haven't actually got a colour, so where it was white it wasn't working very well, but I'm going to turn that back off. And you can change all of these layer styles again, blending mode, sorry, and all this will do is change this layer style itself compared to what I was showing you before. So if I change this back to black again, and I change this to multiply, which is the default, you can see here you've got angle again, which you can angle it around, and you can see as I go through the angle, it's changing the angle of which the shadow is going. So this is sort of like changing the angle of the light in your scene. So once again, this may be that if you have a light coming from the top here, which you want to make it look like this is actually in the scene, you'll have a light coming down here, and you'll change this to sort of be where the light's coming from. So as you can see here, I've now added the shadow here, which would make it look a little bit more natural. And then you've got use global light and not to use global light, which, to be honest with you, I'm not sure what that really does. Oh, actually, no, I've just reminded me. What that actually does is global light will be the actual general global light of everything in the scene. So as you can see, when I changed this, it changed everything in the scene. So once again, this is generally because when you have a light in the scene, you only have one source. You won't have 3 or 4 sources. So there's only one sun in the world, so you're only going to have one light source in general. So that will change everything in the scene. But if you turn that off, you might have actually had another little light here or something, like a lamp or something like that, and you may want that to be creating the shadow on this text. So then you'll be able to set that to this, and that now only changes that layer style and not all of the others around here. And as you can see, if I go back to that and I change it again, you'll see all of them change. But if I switch that back and I switch it to whatever I want, only this layer style itself changes, which, like I said, can be quite a good idea and quite a good effect if you don't want all of these to change at the same time and all of your layer styles and everything to change as you change the angle. Then you have a distance. So if you increase the distance, you can see that's now moving that inner shadow away, further and further away. And then you have a choke, which if you increase the choke, you can see it is increasing sort of the size of the size and softness of your shadow. So if you put that to 0, you can see it's got, at the moment it's got no choke, and it's quite smooth. But if you increase that, it's less smooth and more, I don't really know how to describe that one, but it's more more straight and jagged compared to when you had it a little bit further down. And with the size, if you increase the size, you can see it's now increasing the size of, if I change that back to 0 actually, you can now see that's increasing the size of your shadow. So if I have that on 0, it's got no shadow. If I put that to 1, you can see it's now increasing the shadow, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And that is generally all of the things you have when it comes to inner shadow. And all of these other effects are pretty similar really when it comes to the options. So you have an inner glow, and once again the inner glow has all of the same options really. You can add noise, you can increase the opacity, decrease the opacity. When it comes to inner glow though, one effect that a lot of people will use, let me change the colour here to something like a bright red. A lot of things that people will use, especially these days, they'll have a layer style like this with the, they'll usually do a gradient, but this is just an example, with a colour, and then they'll go to your inner glow, and they'll change this to either white or a slight tint of the colour that's already there. So I have red, so I'll do a slight tint of red, and then change this to something like 25, or some people even just leave it like that, and then they just change it to overlay and soft light or screen here, you see, and then it creates sort of an outline and a little bit of lighting around your text, which really does help it stand out. And you'll see this a lot these days on YouTube and things like that, and they'll generally increase it quite a bit as well. And once again, this is all down to what you think looks good. So in my opinion, something like that looks a little bit better compared to something like that, because that to me looks a little bit too bright. But like I said, this is all down to sort of what you want, and all of the effects here and all of the options here are generally the same as the ones I showed you above. So all you have here is you can center it, so instead of actually having it around the outside, you can have that glow in the inside of your text compared to the outside. So I'm going to change that, and I'm going to create this to 2, or yeah, I'm going to change that to 2, and you'll see that that's now created a glow on the inside, which doesn't actually look very good. But generally you'll just want to keep this on edge, and then play around with the choke and size and so on, and get what sort of effect you were looking for. And this can help make quite a cool neon effect as well, but I'm not going to show you how to do that now. And once again, you can go to the contour and you can change that to whatever you want to get a nice cool effect. Once again, I don't really know how to explain what a contour is, but as you can see, each option changes it slightly and gives it a different effect. And you can obviously change the range of it as well, so you may want it to be 0, or may want it to be quite extreme, and you can change the jitter, and which actually seems to be doing nothing on this one. And once again, you have an anti-aliasing, which will make it a little bit more smoother. And then there is a satin effect as well, which I've never actually used, so I can't give too much information on that one. But once again, if you play around with these, you can see that they give you a nice weird effect. And you can play around with the size, you can play around with all of this sort of stuff. You can uninvert it and anti-aliasing it. You can change the colour. You can then change how it's put onto here, so you can have it darken and so on. One of the main things you'll have that people will use is a gradient or a colour overlay. So the colour overlay will fully change what colour your layer is. So if I come out of this and I go to my background layer here, I used this earlier to change the colour of my background because I was a bit lazy, but if I go back into this now, I can change this to yellow, and I can do that without actually changing what this layer is, if that makes sense. So if I now remove this, so I go, actually I don't want that, it will change it back to the default colour that I originally made it. So you're doing all of this, all of these layer styles are being added without actually altering, like fully making a full change and saving and altering the layer that you're adding it to, which is quite a cool option. You don't get that with a lot of things these days. Generally with a lot of stuff, once you've added it, you've sort of added it, and the only way you can go back is by fully control and undoing. But yeah, I'm gonna go back again and just show you what I was talking about. So if I go to this now, a lot of people will generally do a colour or a gradient overlay. So like I said, with colour, they'll just set a plain old colour, and you can set these again to whatever blending mode you like, and decrease or increase the opacity and so on. And then you can go to gradient maps here, which is one that a lot of people will use. And generally my advice with these is try not to do anything too extreme, and to try and keep things quite simple and nice. But as you can see here, I've just selected a preset in there, but if you look at that preset, it's now give it so it does look like a more natural metal, for the main fact that metals, like I said earlier, usually aren't just a plain old silver colour. They're usually, you know, they're a little bit silver here, they're a little bit darker here, they're a little bit brighter that side, and so on. And by selecting that, I've now created this effect. So if I go to here and I turn that off, it's just plain old like that. But if I re-enable that, it's added, so this is sort of black and then this is white, and it gives it so it's got like a light effect across here. And on these you can change all of the layer style effects again. So vivid light or hard light gives it a different effect. But I'm going to keep this on multiply. And with these, generally, like I said, I would keep these quite simple. So I'm just going to go back to this and reset to default. And I would generally do something like, for example, on this one, I think something like a little bit of a dark grey, and instead of white, a little bit of a greyer colour, for the main fact that generally metals aren't fully white, and that's now give it a slightly different effect. And you can obviously diver these and undiver them, which will generally make the colours itself a little bit smoother. So sometimes you'll see that the colours, especially if you've got, you know, quite a big difference between the two colours, and quite a big space as well, you'll generally see if it's a bigger canvas and a bigger layer, that it can end up being a little bit blotchy. So if you add diver or divering, it will make them a little bit smoother and less blotchy. And you can also reverse these, so you may have done that and then gone, oh for fuck's sake, I've done it the wrong way round sort of thing. And if you go to reverse and flip that, it now flips that round, so without having to go back into here and fully change all of these round to the way you wanted it. Especially if you've done all of them, you may want to go, oh crap, I wanted that over here, and it saves you having to move that all around. You just click reverse and it will reverse what it looks like. And then with the normal old layers, like the normal styles, you can change these to linear, radial, angled, reflected and diamond. So linear will just be, as it says, linear, so that'll be sort of up and down or side to side. So it'll be one point is black, one point is white, for example, if I use white and black. But if I go to radial, you'll see that, let me do something quite extreme here. In fact, this might be a bit easier to show on the background again. So if I turn it off and go to gradient, you can see linear, like I said, one point will be one colour and one point will be the other, so black, white, and you can change the angle on this, so you may want it to come from the side. But I'm going to change that back to 90, and it was 180, wasn't it? No? Okay, reset to default. It was on 90, I don't know why that wasn't set in then. So on 90, and then you can go to something like radial. As you can see, radial will set it so the middle is black and then the sides are white, so it's going radial. And once again you can reverse this, so if I reverse that, it now makes the sides black and the middle white, and you can do this with, like I said, whatever colour you want. And then you have the option of angled, so you can change whatever angle you want. I'm not sure what actual, like, anything you'd really use this effect for, angled. And in my opinion, it's one of the worst ones because it doesn't look very nice and it just looks weird. And then you have reflected, so it'll now reflect whatever you've made. So if you've made that, it'll be one point will be that, so black and then white, and then it will reflect that again. So it'll be white, black, like you've put a mirror in the center here, sort of thing. And then your other option is diamond, which will create a diamond shape. And once again, that's one that I don't particularly like. Generally, I'll only use linear or radial. So I'm going to change that back to linear, and I'm just going to unreverse that. And I'm going to change this to something like, once again, a reddy sort of colour. And a darker red. And as you can see, that's done it. Bright red, dark red, and I go, oh actually I wanted that dark at the bottom and light at the top. What am I doing? And I can just click reverse and change that. And you also have a pattern overlay, which is a bit like some of these don't work together, if that makes sense. So where I've done a gradient will go above a pattern. So I've now added that pattern, but it's done nothing, and that's because I've added a pattern underneath my gradient, and generally it will just put the gradient there instead of the pattern, if that makes sense. But if I go to the pattern here, I don't actually have many installed, but you can go online and you can get patterns. You can even make your own ones. But if you set a pattern, it will set that pattern and it will tile it across all of the layer, and you can rescale it, so you can have it really small, you can have it really big, and so on. And obviously you can change the opacity again, you can change the blending modes, you might want it to be soft light and so on. Generally I don't actually use patterns at all in any of the work that I do, but previously I have used them on some of these sort of text layers to give the text a little bit of a cool effect. Like really long time ago I made sort of a cartoony type effect as a pattern, and imported it, so then it made the text look like it was sort of made from cutouts of a cartoon magazine, which was quite cool for the sort of design I was going for at the time. And then you have outer glow, which is practically the same as indigo but on the outside. So if I change this to, I'll do a black, which, oh actually it's not going to have an outer glow on that, so I'm going to go to text again and I'm going to add an outer glow, and as you can see it's now added a white outer glow, and that's because the colour is white. And if I add sort of let's say a yellow, you can see that's now changed to yellow. And once again you have the opacity, so you might want that quite low, you may want it really high. Generally I'd only have it at the default or lower and not any higher. And once again you can add noise to this, so as you can see that's added noise. Generally I don't add any noise to the glow at all, and I'll just have a normal glow. So yeah, your options here are soft and precise. So the precise will be a little bit more precise and a little bit more jagged and straight compared to the softer, which will be a really softer type feel to it. And you can add obviously your spread, you can increase your spread or your size, and obviously if you do it loads it'll just look a bit stupid, but if you do something like that, you can see that's added quite a lot of glow. But if I decrease that and add this a little bit up again, that's added a really vibrant glow. And once again, it looks a bit stupid really, but you just have to play around with these to get the sort of effect you're looking for. And once again, you can add a contour to it, so that looks a bit stupid, but you can add a contour to it. Although, like I said, I generally don't use these, but there was a way before of playing around with these to give your, like I said again, if you're doing a neon sort of feel, as you can see with this, it's sort of done the effect around what we were working on. So if I do it like that, this, like I said, this isn't the best example with this sort of text, and then had that the same sort of colour, it will give a neon sort of effect around the edges and make it actually look like the neon itself is glowing. Generally though, I will keep this as it is, and I won't actually change any of the settings here. I would only play around with the ones at the top. And once again, you can blend these, so you may want to add soft light, hard light, and so on. Most of these you just can scroll through and see what one looks best for you. Generally though, I would just leave it on what was normally on anyway. And then you have drop shadow, which is quite similar to the outer glow and the inner shadow, in the sense that it will just add a shadow on the outside instead of the inside. And you can generally play around with these and use global light or not use global light and so on. Generally I won't use the global light when it comes to using a drop shadow. I'll just have it unticked and use whatever angle I think looks nice. But on most of the work that I do, I don't really have a light in the scene, and I don't actually shadow it to having a shadow underneath something. Like, so if you're doing something realistic, like a photo manipulation, you might actually have the sun and you might want a shadow underneath a person, sort of their shadow behind them or something like that. And this is a way of, you know, changing the way it looks. So you might want to go through all the angles and change, well, the light's coming from this side, so I want the shadow to be over here. I want the shadow to be, you know, a little bit further away, so that because the sun's quite far away, and I want it to be quite a big shadow. And you can then, you know, up it and make it look like it's, you know, more realistic and play around with it. But generally with the work that I do, I'll decrease all of these sort of things, and I'll change this to 0 distance and something like 5 spread and 10 here. And on this, that is quite bright, but generally when most of the stuff I do, I'll then lower that to something like 25%. But like I said, this is all dependent on what you actually want to do and sort of effect you're going for. And once again, you can add a contour to this, but generally I don't, and I'll just leave it as it was really. So I'll just leave it as a default, and I'll play around with the ones up here. And you can actually change the colour of these, so you can go through here and change the colour, but generally I'll leave that on black. And for most people, you'll probably leave it on black as well, because you'll just be looking to add a normal old shadow. And the way I did the effect around here on the bottom, oh actually I changed it earlier, didn't I? But as you can see at the top here, you can see I added a drop shadow, but the drop shadow is fully, it's not transparent like this one here. So all I done there was add the opacity all the way to 0, all the way to 100, and I changed all of these to 0, and then changed the distance. And as you can see, the distance is now created sort of, it gives it a little bit more of a 3D feel to it, I think anyway. And this can be a great way to make it stand out a little bit more to the background. So if you have a lot of stuff going on and a lot of bright colours, this can help it stand out. So yeah, that is layer styles in general. And another cool tip as well was once you've made a layer style that you like, so I've gone, oh, this layer style looks really nice, I'll probably use that again in the future. If you go to new layer styles, and I'll put, for example, I'll just do tutorial, if I can type, and I'll click OK, and that will save that. So if I now go to let's create a new text here, just for example, and I've just spammed my keyboard. I did go to type tutorial, but I've just spammed my keyboard instead. And I go to my layer styles again. If it'll open, it's now froze. I'm not sure why that's froze. Give it 1 second. Hopefully it'll fix itself. Oh no, for some reason I altered that by accident, sorry. But if I open that now and I go to styles and I go all the way to the bottom here, because that's the previous one that I just saved, and I click that, it's now done the exact same one onto my layer style. The only thing you'll notice is really this is a smaller text to what I previously done, or a smaller layer to what I previously made it on. It doesn't look quite the same. So if I make this a lot smaller, you'll see what I'm saying. So I changed it to 72. It now just looks nothing like what I originally made, And a good way of going around this is a lot of people would just go into this and they'd go into all of these options here and play around with every single one of these again to get it to look exactly the same on a smaller piece or a bigger piece. And all you have to actually do with a lot of these is go to Layer, Layer Style, and Scale Effect. And the Scale Effect will scale all of the effects and the layer styles that are on this text now. So if I go to this and let's say this is around 25% smaller, and I click OK, that's now made that effect, on that, and it looks a little bit better compared to what it previously looked like. And if I zoom in a bit, you can see that the effect itself actually looks a little bit better and a little bit closer match compared to what it did look like. So if I go to Layer, Layer Style, Scale Effect, and I add that to really high again, you can see it's gone really high and really small. So you can change it depending on how big or small the layer you're adding the effect is to. And this can be a great way of obviously reusing layer styles without having to edit all of them again. And like I said, if you have a good layer style, you can just save it. And another good tip is if you want to use another layer style, if you have a different layout to what I've got my layer styles here, but you may want to use the exact same one. You might have a few similar ones. So on here, I can't really tell what's the difference between them two, but there is a difference because I've saved them and there clearly is a difference. Otherwise, I wouldn't have saved two different ones. But the other way you can do that is go and right click, copy layer style, and if I go to this one and I go right click, paste layer style, that has now pasted that layer style onto this text. So you can go around and copy and paste layer styles between things, so it's a lot quicker than having to then go back into this and go layer style, layer, and choose what one. You can just right click the one you like and paste it back onto another one. So anyway guys, I know this is a very long tutorial and I hope that I've actually covered things and explained them quite well. I do know I have rambled a little bit, so sorry if I've rambled a bit too much and you're bored by now and you've only watched 5 minutes of it and got bored. Hopefully I do get a lot more people ask for other tutorials, and I will try and shorten them down. I didn't realise I'd recorded for quite so long. I have obviously tried to explain every little part in quite a bit more detail to some of the other tutorials I've previously watched when I was trying to learn some of this stuff. And yeah, hopefully you guys enjoy the video, and I'll see you in the next one.